Yes.
Hello and welcome all. This is me, Rakshit, live with Ali Rizvi from Secular Jihadist YouTube channel, and we are live here. And today we'll be discussing about his book, Atheist Muslim, A Journey Towards Reason from Religion. And it's a very interesting book we'll be talking about, and I hope people are gonna enjoy this. So before I do continue further, I would like to encourage our viewers who are watching the live currently to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Most importantly, like and share the live so that more people get to know about it. So, getting the main point, I think we had a first live part with you, and I think it was a great introduction about your life and how you got doubts on the religion, how you came out of it, and how you sort of got through the reason and very humanistic approach. But today it's a kind of very specific topic on your book.
Yeah.
It's the atheist Muslim journey towards reason from religion. Do check it out in the Go Amazon and Kindle versions. You are gonna surely enjoy the book. Uh, one of the interesting things I have when I was reading about the book is in one of your early chapters, you mention about a letter of Thomas Jefferson, if I'm not
Right.
wrong. I think it was 1786. Yep. When I was, so,
Yeah.
so do tell a little bit about that letter and what it signifies. I think it was most part about Islam. About when he was, I think, having a representative going to, if I'm not wrong, Tripoli, is it? Yeah, Tunisia.
In Libya, it was a treaty. By the way,
Libya. Yeah, it was some African
yeah,
country. I just,
North
yeah.
Africa. Yeah. So yeah,
So,
yeah. Thank you first of all, Rakshi, for having me on again. It was really good to talk to you guys last time. I'm here. You got to excuse my voice. It's a Saturday morning here, and for some reason, like I had a late Friday night. Anyway, I won't dwell on that. Yeah, that it was kind of interesting is because the Thomas Jefferson letter, he had gone to meet the envoy. Well, he had gone to London actually, as I recall, to meet the envoy from Tripoli, because what was happening at that time is that the U.S. had just gotten declared their independence from the British, and they were sending ships to trade in the Mediterranean, and they were in the North African region at the time. There were pirates who were basically pirating these ships, these trade ships that were coming from America, and they were taking the people and they were enslaving them. Right, they were stealing from there. So they this was a problem before as well, but before the British gave them protection. But now that they were independent from the British would no longer give them protection. So he went to try and make a deal with these pirates, and he met I think it was Siri Abdurrahman Aja was his name. So he was the envoy from Tripoli. So at that point, and this is before the U.S. had been in before America had been in any kind of foreign sort of incursion or conflict with anybody. So he sent when Thomas Jefferson reported back um, from London after meeting this man. The man had told him, like, very specifically that our prophet in our book tells us that every non-Muslim is to be taken. We can take them as slaves. I mean, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but if you have it, you can read it. You should be taken as slaves. We can enslave them because ultimately, we are fighting a jihad. So, I mean, basically, talk jihad aspect, some right. This is in 1786. Now, if you read this right now, when they talk about this whole thing about jihad and holy war, in Islam, they often, they'll blame it on all kinds of things. They'll say this is because of the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's because for U.S. foreign policy. So the point of that quote and putting that in the book was that this whole conflict happened, before Iran, Iraq happened, before 1786, before it happened, before any of the other issues that we know today, before the Taliban, before ISIS, before the creation of Israel or Palestine. It predated all of that, but the belief, this idea of jihad and taking non-Muslims and enslaving them as a legitimate virtue was existent even back then. And as a result of this, excuse me, it was as a result of this that the Treaty of Tripoli, famous Treaty of Tripoli, that states that the United States is in no way a Christian nation, right? That those words, and it sort of established one of the fundamental founding documents of not founding documents, but one of the fundamental declarative documents that the United States is a secular nation. That came out of that conflict. So the very first conflict in the late 1700s that the United States engaged in overseas was a conflict with this whole idea of Islamic jihad.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a very interesting point because a lot of people don't know about this. I mean, when we talk about Islam, you get to hear about the 9/11, the Arab Spring of 2011, and maybe more say about the Iraq War, the Iranian Revolution of 79. These are the
Right.
certain common things which we get to hear about when we talk about the Islamic Jihad. But talking about Thomas Jefferson back in the 18th century, the late 18th century, I should say, this kind of strikes chord that, oh, even these things are going on, and there was already a struggle of powers here and there. One of the
Right.
interesting things when I do look at your books is you have taken into account the Jews and Christians as well for certain reason. I have seen you do quote from the Exodus about the land of Israel, and then you quote from Quran 551, if I'm not wrong, when I've read in the second part of the book.
Hmm.
Now, of course, for me to understand I do understand that these are kind of interlinked, but how do you see all of this? I mean, with this respect to the things of happening in Israel, and then the idea of Quran 551, and then you do mention clearly that there is no last day until Muslims carry out a complete genocidal killing of the Jews. You do mention in the next page. So
Yeah.
there are certain interesting I do see here, and you do quote Christian scriptures as well. I
Hmm?
think New Testament you did quote once, I guess. So how do you see all of this? I mean, is it like one is trying to pull each other's leg, or is the root of the conflict really on the both the sides, or is it just only with the Islam, or how do
Oh
you
no,
see
it's
this
it's
thing? I think
everywhere. It's everywhere. It just depends on what time of history you're in, right? So I mean, what in all of these books. I mean, the reason I quoted from the Old Testament is because a lot of what you see that's happening in
Hello? Hello, your mic is mute. Your mic was mute. Your mic was mute.
Okay, I should be back now. Can you hear me? Can you hear
Yeah,
me now?
your mic was mute. Sorry. So you were
My
continuing
mic got
somewhere about, yeah.
it got kicked out. Yeah. So one of the reasons that I quote it is from the Old Testament is just to show the reason why Israel has been established in those biblical boundaries. I mean, there were other places. For instance, if this was truly a secular undertaking, um, Israel could have been established really in a lot of other places in the world. I mean, you can imagine there are many other places that were much more where they could have lived a lot more peace, do in this one region where they were going to be targeted, obviously. But the reason that it was established in that area is because the parameters for it are in the Old Testament. So I'll read out just one of the verses from the Old Testament, and that's it's from Exodus 23, and the passages are 31 and 32, and it says, quote, "I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, and from the desert to the Euphrates River. I will give into your hands the people who live in the land, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them or their gods." Right. So and this is just one. I mean, there's also, if you go to Deuteronomy 1:8, or you go to Genesis, I mean, there are many places in the Jewish scriptures where you'll see this whole idea of, that this was a promised land for you, and go and drive out all the people before you. So this is it's a religious command, right, for them. And on the Islamic side, this is the whole idea that of the Jews being apes and pigs, and there are many Quranic verses related to that. There are many hadith, that talk about, uh, uh, the Jewish people. And I mean, it's, like when it comes to, um, Islam is obviously, there's a lot of stuff about Jews and Christians at the time, especially Jews and Christians who did not convert to Islam or who did not accept it. Not as bad as what Islam says about the polytheists, but I mean, this is with all the religions. I mean, all of these religions, the Abrahamic religions, have been in competition with each other. I mean, even the Christians in the New Testament, everybody has to accept Jesus as their savior. And if they don't accept Jesus as their savior, you know where they're going. They're all going to hell. So even the evangelical Christians in the United States, they believe they're very Israel. They support Israel because they want all the Jews to return to this land, to the to Israel, so that Jesus can come back and they can have their rapture and they can all go to heaven. Now, what's going to happen to the Jews when they return to Israel if they don't accept Jesus as their savior and they decide to stay Jews? According to the same evangelicals, they're going to go to hell, right? So they even though they are supportive of Israel, they really look at Jews as pawns, as a way for them to achieve their rapture. So the whole thing is very sinister, and it's extremely tribal, and it's based on all of these myths. So yeah, this is across the board. It's not just an Islam thing. When it comes to that conflict and this whole issue uh, with the Jews and the anti-Semitism, this is very deeply rooted in uh, in all of these Abrahamic religions.
Yeah, I think it was a good point. Also, one of the things when I did read about when I read about your book, I did come across towards the various chapter. You do cover aspects of Shia Islam. I mean, lots of worldwide when we do discuss about Islam in general, it's about Prophet Muhammad, the Sunnah, the Quran, and the Sirat al Rasul, and you have, I think, the Dawa teams, and we discuss more so about 90% it's about Wahhabism. But very few people actually really know about Shias. I mean, that, at least when I did read about your book, you do mention about the 12 Shias, you do mention about the Iranian Revolution and uh, its historical impact previously and what happened in Iran at the time. You do cover certain depths of it. But general, when we talk about Islam, most people have no idea about these things. They don't have even clue about what Shia Islam really is, and where this idea of 12 Shia originated and how it continues to be a political power within Iran and how it influences the politics there. So I would like you to cover certain of these points in detail, at least for the audience to have a better understanding of these things. I guess when we
Oh
talk
yeah.
about Islam, it's 90% Wahhabism. Very few discuss about the Shia aspect of Islam and problems in it. So I would like
Mm.
to have a deep dive little bit on this. Yeah.
Yeah, this I mean it's a very very expansive. So I think that I'll try and summarize it as much as I can. The main differences between the Shia and the Sunni. So the Sunnis are the majority of Muslims. The Shia are a minority. The main differences between them are really two. One is, they have a conflict about who is the successor to the Prophet Muhammad, and the Sunnis have a series of caliphs that they believe in. The first caliph was Abu Bakr, then there's Umar and Usman, and then Ali, who was a fourth caliph. The Shia believe in imams, so they believe that after the Prophet died, he had his cousin and his son-in-law Ali became he was his declared successor, and Ali, according to the Shias, is divine. He's infallible. He has actually God-given authority, spiritual authority, and leadership over the Muslims. And then after Ali, there is more. Give me a second. My mic again got.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I should be back if you can hear me. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do continue. Do continue.
so the yeah, so that's the first. It was the differences that they have in terms of the successorship of after the Prophet. The second main difference is there are sources of hadith. So hadith are the traditions of Muhammad. They document the actions and the life of Muhammad, and they supplement the Quranic scripture. So the Quran is actually quite vague when it comes to a lot of the Islamic practices. So it'll tell you to pray. It doesn't really tell you to pray 5 times a day. It has a lower number. It doesn't tell you how to pray. It doesn't tell you how to do, all of the things that it commands. And that information all comes from the hadith. So the hadith are in the Sunni sect. The hadith come from the Sahaba, like these are companions of the Prophet and or scribes who essentially wrote down. They used to follow him around, and then they passed on the word by word of mouth. What the practices of the Prophet were, and then about 2 centuries after the Prophet's death, these hadith were compiled in writing by people like Bukhari and Abu Huraira, and there were, I think, 6 or 7 hadith books um, that had these collections. In the Shia, the hadith come directly from the imams, right? So these are again the family of the Prophet. They call it the Ahlul Bayt, right? And they believe that the Ahlul Bayt is also divine. They're free from sin. They're given God. They have God-given divinity, and that starts with Ali as the first imam, and then after that it's Hassan and his 2 sons, and then it continues onward to the 12th imam, and the 12th imam was basically lifted up from earth, and he is called the Mahdi, Imam Mahdi, and he's supposed to return. The Sunnis also believe in the Mahdi, but they don't believe that he was lifted up. They think he's going to come de novo as a totally new entity. And the Shia believe that he's going to be a return of the 12th imam. Now, within the Shia, there's also some splits. So within these are the 12 are the Ethnashri Shias. Then you have the Ismaili Shia. The Ismaili Shia, for instance, they split at the 6th Imam, right, or the 6th Imam for the Ethnashri Shias, which is Jafar Sadiq. And Jafar Sadiq's a very interesting character. First of all, he is a descendant of Ali, obviously, but he is also a descendant of Abu Bakr, which is interesting. This is something that a lot of Shias actually don't even know. Abu Bakr's son, right, was Muhammad bin Abu Bakr, was adopted by Ali after Abu Bakr's death, and So Abu Bakr's, widowed his son, and then he was basically a very sort of a very prized and very dearly loved man by Ali, and then his Abu Bakr's children and his descendants eventually married into, and his descendants, one of his descendants from both Ali's side and from Abu Bakr's side was Jafar Sadiq. And Jafar Sadiq was he was a teacher of the four, the leaders of the four Sunni madhabs, which is, the schools of thought. Uh, and these are like Abu Hanifa and Hanbal and Malik and Shafi. And these are the four primary schools of thought in Sunnism. So he was actually their teacher too. So what's really interesting is that even though Shia and Sunnis, really are at loggerheads with each other, and that's putting it mildly, um, these people actually got along quite well back then. So, you had the sixth Imam of the Nasri Shias really, being the mentor and the teacher of at least three of the leaders of the four, Sunni madhabs. And then you also had the, Abu Bakr's son being adopted by Ali, and on both sides, from Abu Bakr and Ali's side, giving rise to Jafar Sadiq as a descendant. So at that time, they did seem to get along, and I think a lot of these differences turn out to be more recent, and they've probably been magnified by them. But either way, what happens is that the Sunni Shia conflict, their animosity is much more serious, as it often happens when you have sects within a religion. They tend to be at war with each other a lot more than people outside the religion. So you see that even today, that the Sunni Arabs, like, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they are actually they have stronger alliances now with Israel, right, with the Jewish state, because of their enmity towards Iran, which is Shia. So they, even a sworn enemy, the Jewish state, they will align themselves with them just so they can fight against the Shia and Iran, which is like, the Shia entity and its proxies. So yeah, it's just basically like any other religious conflict. Unfortunately, it's very deadly. Unfortunately, it kills a lot of people, but it's just based on really, frankly, ridiculous differences of opinion, when it comes to things like successorship and, who said what, and, which hadith are authentic. I mean, it's basically differences in the kind of fairy tales that they believe in. And, much like, and that's really not much of a difference than from many other religions who have the same kind of sectarianism.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think people do understand a little bit of. Your part three of the book deals with born again skeptic, okay? And you talk about your personal life. Oh, can you just highlight a little bit of that? What was going through at that stage, and what you discovered? And you talk a lot of things within that, which I would like to highlight as well. So, can you tell at that stage when you were say in the part three book, the born again skeptic, and uh, you start questioning, and you talk about when you were 5 years old, you were in this place. You do talk about those things. So can you just have a little bit of highlight on those as well?
Yeah, and I think I talked about this in the previous stream too, is that like the skepticism started very early, and a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
of it had to do with when I was 5, I had a cousin who was 3 years old at the time, and she died of childhood leukemia, or lymphocytic leukemia, which nowadays is curable in the vast majority of cases. At that time, there was no cure for it. So when she died, we were present at the time of her death, and she died at home. And it was a horrendous thing to watch. I mean, if you can imagine a 3-year-old child with cancer, cancer is one of the most painful and torturous deaths you can ever have. And, it doesn't discriminate. You know how much pain, grown adults go through when they're dying of cancer. And, that pain doesn't discriminate. In a 3-year-old, it's just as intense. So it's absolutely a horrendous thing. It's something that, you, even when you're 5 and you're young, you just never forget. And we were in the room and we were watching this, and obviously everybody was terrible. Her mother, my aunt, and my mother, they were all crying by her bedside, and they were praying, and she was essentially gasping for breath. It was a horrible scene. I was standing with my father, and I asked him, I said, what's happening? And my father said, well, she's going back to Allah. Allah's taking her away. And, she's going back to God. He tried to put a positive spin. And I saw her, obviously she was in pain. She was in agony. So I said, well, why is everybody crying and reading and reading all these verses from the Quran? And he said, well, that's because they're praying to God to not take her away. They're begging God to please don't take her away. And immediately when I saw that scene and I saw her in agony, I thought of, as a 5-year-old, I thought of a tug of war where you had God on one side, he's kind of pulling her on, towards him. And on the other side, there, all of her loved ones, her parents, her whole family that are saying, please, begging him, pulling the other end of the rope. And it just seemed horribly sadistic to me. And I just thought this, whoever this God deity is, I mean, this is just absolutely horrendous. He's being so sadistic towards it. And that was my introduction. And then after that, so I thought of that after that, I was like, this God character seems like, pretty, it seems like pretty bad news. And over the next few days, I saw everybody praising him, everybody praying to him, during the funeral processions and everything. So I became a little skeptical, but at the same time, I was a kid. All these other grown-ups are doing things. I thought, they're probably right. They probably know something I don't. So I wouldn't really talk about it too much, because if you talked about it, you'd get in trouble. From then onwards, everything that I saw, it felt, I always ended up seeing sides of things that most people weren't talking about. And the examples I give in the book is, first of all, if there was a plane crash, like I remember watching a plane crash, there was a survivor in the plane crash. And the survivors were thanking God. They're like, oh, thank you, God, for saving us and sparing our lives in this plane crash. And I immediately thought, it was like, well, what did God have against all the other 200 people who died on the plane? Why did he choose this one person, standing in the middle of a farm to save this person? What's so special about him? So I would think things like that. And when I think it was 1988, when Zia Haq, the Pakistani president, the military leader of Pakistan at the time, was killed in an explosion on his plane. There was a small copy of his Quran, his personal copy of the Quran, that survived. And I saw that and I thought, everybody talked about it like it was a miracle. Like, it's a miracle the Quran survived. I was like, well, there's like about a dozen people who died on that plane. They're human beings who will never come back. But this book, like, God chose to save this book, which you can buy at pretty much any store, any bookstore. Why would that? How does that make sense? But for some reason, all over the media, everywhere else, people were just saying that, this is a miracle. So it didn't make a lot of sense to me. So I started looking at things very skeptically from a younger age. I still did go through phases when I was religious, when I would pray. Typically, whenever I had exams at school, I'd become very religious. And then I'd sort of go in and out of it, until I grew up. So there were many aspects to it. I used to look at the Quran and the scripture. I used to read it. I used to try to interpret it liberally, look at, what it could possibly mean, and try to do some of the mental gymnastics, like you do with the people who are religious have to do that, because there's so many ridiculous things in pretty much all religions. I mean, this about Hinduism too. I mean, like when it comes to the bizarreness or the nonsensical nature of these ideas, I mean, they exist throughout all of the religions, whether they're Abrahamic religions, whether they're Eastern religions, but we try to justify them because we want to respect them. We want to think of them as the truth. But after a while, the cognitive dissonance just becomes too much of a burden to bear, right? And you ultimately have to let it go.
That's a very, very good point. Coming back, you in fact said about that diseases do not see religion, and you saw your sister pass through all of that cancer, and she had to suffer.
Yeah, my cousin.
It reminded certain things when I was reading through the book. It reminded certain things when you talk about nature is cruel, and there are storms, there are hurricanes, there are tornadoes, earthquakes. You do talk about them, the destructions they cause. And then you also have mentioned, I think, the famine of Ethiopia in 1980s. So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit of that? Where are those you're referring to? Where it plays a very significant to know about all these things. Yeah,
Yeah, I think I don't remember exactly what you're referring to for the book, but just the idea of the nature of
yeah, yeah,
suffering. I mean, this is the suffering question: is that there are a lot of unfair things that happen, but really bad things happen to good people, good things, and good things happen to bad people. So there is a sort of a very fundamental level of injustice based on where you're born and how you're born and so on. So there's a and this is something that's a problem because there is a this is an age old question. I think Epicurus talked about it, and it gives you, when you try to logically think about it, I mean, there is a tremendous amount of suffering. And let's take innocent children, with cancer, with terminal painful cancer. And whenever you see something like that, if you just go to a children's ward, a cancer ward in a hospital, and you see these little kids with that, you look at it, and clearly they didn't do anything to deserve this. Nobody does anything to deserve it. It's completely random who gets this, and it's a combination of genetics and where they were born, and what their environment was like, and everything like that. So when you look at it, you think, well, um, if there is a God, he's either okay with this, he's okay with letting these little kids suffer, whatever that test is that he's trying to do, and he has the will to stop it, but he won't, which kind of makes him evil, or he's unable to stop it. He wants to stop it. Either he has the will to stop it, and he won't, which means that he's powerless, or he doesn't have the will to stop it at all. He's okay with it happening, which makes him evil. So it's got to be one of these two things. Like, why would it happen? Just logically, it doesn't make any sense. Um, and so these are things that, I mean, this is an age old question that everybody has thought about. When it comes to the idea of a benevolent God, is why does suffering exist, and why does it exist in at such disproportionate levels? Another thing I talk about in the book is something like evolution. I remember I spoke a couple of years ago at the Arab American National. There's an institute in I think Detroit and Dearborn, Michigan, and there was there was a panel. There was a conference on science, like science and religion and Islam specifically. So there were some experts, like Muslim experts on evolution. They came in, they said, well, and they believe in evolution. They don't think it contradicts Islam, but they talked about it as this beautiful thing, as the evolution is such a brilliant way to create life and have life evolve on its own on Earth. And this is something that God put in motion. They said this is something Allah put in motion. He created this whole process of evolution, and they talked about about how wonderful it is and how much of a genius phenomenon it is. And I had to counter that. So when I did my talk, I really had to explain what evolution is. And evolution is actually a very, very cruel, right? And it's a very suffering based process. Like, evolution is a ruthless process. It's responsible for 99% of all species that ever existed being extinct. It's the fact that every living thing has to kill other living things to survive, whether it's plants or whether it's animals. And there's a sadistic element to that too. Like, if you have a cheetah, that runs really fast, the cheetah has to run really fast so it can catch the gazelle. So as the cheetahs evolve, they evolve to run faster and faster, because that's how they survive, by catching the gazelle and eating them for survival. The gazelle has to evolve with every generation to run faster and faster so it can escape the cheetah. Right. So it's kind of like playing both sides and strengthening them. And this is it's a very brutal, it's a very sort of sadistic process. Evolution is not a pleasant or a beautiful phenomenon. It's a very ruthless um, and cruel phenomenon in a way. So if people want to attribute this to God, and this really depends on whatever your religion you're in. If you want to do that, then you're just reinforcing the fact that this the cruelty of nature, you're attributing it to a benevolent deity, which really doesn't make any sense. In Hinduism, for instance, and this is something, with a lot of Hindu people I talk, and a lot of these Hindu atheists as well, which is, this in quotes. I mean, you're pretty familiar with these guys. Um, they'll talk about reincarnation. Like, reincarnation is this beautiful thing that we have. The Abrahamic religions, they don't talk about reincarnation. We talk about life, how it continues, and you come back and you live on. It's a beautiful concept about life after death. But the thing is, reincarnation has its own evils in it. Like, it's a very sinister concept, because that it means that if you are born in a lower caste, right, if you're born in unfortunate or circumstances, you somehow deserve it. And there's something that you did in your past life, even if you're an innocent child. Well, you did. It's basically, you earned this terrible existence that you're living through the deeds of your past life. And this is obviously false. It never happens. Nobody deserves the fate that they get, but it makes it harder for people to move out of it. Right. So in all of these religions, there is this idea of suffering, and the way that they've tried to explain it, a lot of times it backfires and it makes things a lot worse, right? So I think that's the nature of, I think, this basic point I was getting to when I was writing about it, all
Yeah.
those natural disasters and the evolution and everything.
Yeah. I think you summed up the evolution well. That explains why suffering is there, because there is no God,
Hmm.
and things have been evolving naturally as
Yeah.
part of the universe, how it is working. That explains very well. One of my favorite part of the book is you actually showed out the Twitter trends of ex-Muslim, hash ex-Muslim because so and so.
Hmm.
You put out you actually dedicate 3 to 4 pages of those tweets, and you have shown.
Hmm.
And this is actually part of me getting into dialogue with more of this ex-Muslim movement, which I'll be coming back. Uh, Interesting thing is, a paragraph mentions Maryam Nawazi saying criticizing Islam or Islam is not anti-Muslim.
Hmm.
Okay, so could you please explain that, and as well as the tweets? The tweets which come up in the following pages, hash ex-Muslim so and so, and there are many interesting things which I read out in that. That was because one of my favorite part in the book. So can you talk about this as well? I think it will be great insight for me. Yeah.
Yeah, when I mean, one of the underlying themes of the book is that we have to make a distinction between Islam and Muslims. So Islam is a set of ideas in a book, and Muslims are a group of people, right? And people are a lot more than their beliefs, and we all know that. So when you have an ideology that's summed up in a book, I mean, that's ideas. They don't have rights. Okay, they don't. They're not entitled to respect. Human beings do have rights, and they are entitled to respect. So that's a really big distinction. When you criticize it, if I say that I think that smoking is a filthy habit, that doesn't mean that all people who are smokers are filthy people. That's the last thing that it means. So when you are criticizing an ideology, right, which is you're criticizing Islam as a set of ideas, when you challenge ideas, and that has historically what moved societies forward. But when you start demonizing people, like demonizing Muslims, that's going to rip societies apart. Okay, that's just going to alienate people. It'll cause more conflict. So this distinction between criticizing ideas and demonizing people is absolutely key. Okay, and Islam is an idea, religion is an idea, and Muslims are a people, and religious people are people, and that's very different. You should be able to challenge the beliefs of people while respecting the people who hold them. Um, and that's really the underlying theme. And Maryam Namazi, who's, by the way, like I've always said, that she's a hero of mine. She's she's a founder of the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. Just an absolutely amazing, iconic human being, just a living legend. And she sort of began this. Her and some of the people that were working at the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain began this Ex-Muslim Because campaign. I think it was in several years ago, and it was sort of a coming out campaign for apostates, for people who were raised in Muslim households, and now that they were saying that well, they don't believe in the religion anymore, and they were talking about why. And then, so there was a Twitter campaign, and then they had this hashtag ex-Muslim because, and there were just thousands and thousands, I think even more than that, just countless people who tweeted it. And it became at one point the number one trending Twitter trend in the UK. And people were, I think it happened within 24 hours, and it just completely shocked everybody, because the 20, like a few years ago, this was a big thing in the in the UK. There were, there were a lot of things happening. ISIS was very prominent. There was a lot of issues that revolved around Islam, and all of the issues related to it. So there was a tremendous backlash towards it too. Like, who are these people? It was, I think, really the first time that it became visible that, okay, these ex-Muslims, people leaving the Islamic religion, are huge in number, and many of these tweets and many of these people were coming from Muslim majority countries. They're coming from Pakistan, they're coming from Saudi Arabia, they're coming from Indonesia, from India, all of these places that have large Muslim populations. And it was very refreshing to see, because you see this everywhere else. I mean, you have lapsed Catholics, you have secular Jews, you have people who've left Scientology and left Mormonism, and they all get TV deals and book deals and things like that. But you just never really hear, at that point at least, you never really heard about people who had left the Islamic faith. So a lot of this was really an attempt to try and normalize that and say that, well, this happens too. This is the second largest, religious group in the world. And it has just like any other religious group, it has its own share of skeptics and doubters and people who are, more in favor of reason and rationality and, science and critical thinking. So it was a very sort of eye-opening thing for the world to see. And so I think it was a fantastic campaign, and I tried to highlight it a lot in the book, because I think that this is really one of the very first sort of social media phenomena that really put out there the idea that the Muslim world does have many, many, many rationalists and freethinkers as well, and that they're getting a voice because of this, the internet. One quote from Maryam Namazi is that she said that the internet is doing to Islam what the printing press did in the past to Christianity. The printing press, when the printing press came, it ushered in the age of enlightenment. Right? It was a gradual process, but that's what it did. It allowed a free exchange of ideas. It allowed people to challenge the sort of religious theocracies that they were living under Christendom in the dark ages of Christian Europe. And ultimately, it resulted in what we have now. Is you have largely Christian majority countries in the West are just generally they're extremely secular in foundation. Christianity has been basically castrated, and it just become this sort of like modern day hippie type thing about love and forgiveness, which was far from what it was in the dark ages in Europe back in the day. And yeah, the same kind of thing. I mean, could it happen to Islam? Yeah, probably. It's too early to tell, but there's already been. I mean, we're in a very, very different world now than we were just around 3 decades ago, when Salman Rushdie was, there was a bounty placed on Salman Rushdie's head because he wrote a book. And now there are these campaigns, as people speaking out. I'm speaking to you, and I think it's an amazing thing. Rationalism, being religious skeptics, is fantastic, because people like yourself and me, people like you who decided that Hinduism was irrational, and you wanted to be a rational thinker, and you left that set of that sort of mythological system to embrace reason. And I come from a place where I come from the Abrahamic, the Muslim side, and I left that to embrace rationality and religion. And now, both of us can speak to each other. We can get along. We can explore reality. We can explore a whole bunch of different ideas. We can exchange them. Whereas if we had stayed in our original tribes, we would be at war with each other. We wouldn't even be having this conversation. So I think, that whole point that Maryam Namazi made, and that, organization that she started has really facilitated that, and has done, absolute wonders for free thinkers in the Muslim world.
Yeah, I mean that's fantastic. Actually, the reason why I asked because those tweets, 3 4 pages, I think they are the first, the favorite part of my book. That the book reading which I did, that's the favorite part, to be honest. Because to be openly saying you left, I think it's a great courage and great sign to what is to come about in the future. You have extensively actually quoted from Richard Dawkins and about Christopher Hitchens, especially Christopher Hitchens' book, I think, Why God is Not Great. You have quoted extensively
Mhm.
from those whenever you see certain geopolitical scenarios. Also, can you talk a little bit about kind of influences Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens had on your way of thinking and leading up to all this movement?
Yeah, they had for Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens. For me, when they started talking about religion, it was more of a uh, it was more of a recognition, I think, than an influence. And I'm not saying that they didn't, of course, a massive influence on everything, but for me, it was a recognition. As in, when I was growing up, there were many all of those things that I talked about. There was, I was skeptical about many things. I had these certain thoughts that if I talked to my, the adults around me, then I would get scolded for them. So I didn't really push it too much. And I was also living in Saudi Arabia, so it was dangerous. It was actually, there was bodily danger to speaking out about these things. Um, so when I saw Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, and I had seen these, people like one of my favorite comedians of all time, George Carlin, used to talk about religion all the time. But it was all sort of very Judeo-Christian centric, their criticism, which was fantastic too. It was excellent. But I never really heard about it. There was never anything relatable. But what I liked about Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens is they weren't afraid to. I mean, they would absolutely skewer Christianity and Judaism fearlessly, but they weren't scared to lump Islam in with those things. And a lot of people called them Islamophobic or anti-Muslim because of it. But the fact is that they were just being even-handed. Everything that they were saying about Islam was the same things that they were saying about Christianity and Judaism. And I think that that was something that was refreshing to me, and I recognized it. And I think that that also enabled a lot of people from the Muslim world to come out. So they had a big influence that way. Christopher Hitchens was one of the reasons that he was a pretty amazing man was that he and the good thing about not having a religion is that nobody's infallible. So there are countless things I disagree with Christopher Hitchens on. I disagree with a lot of his politics, his support for the war in Iraq, many things that I disagree with Richard Dawkins on, and that's perfectly fine because they're not prophets. I don't have to follow them. But what I liked about Christopher Hitchens is when he wrote about something, like, he wrote about it from having been there. I mean, this is a man who sat with the grandson of Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, right, and had scotch with him and had a conversation. Then he wrote about it. He was in Uganda. He was sitting with the child soldiers in Uganda, and he wrote about Joseph Kony. Remember the whole Kony thing that happened at the time, years before it became a big phenomenon. He was he'd gone to Syria. He'd gone into all of these places of conflict, and he had talked with the people. He'd been with the people. He'd been to Iraq. He had spoken to young kids, who were living there, and he would talk about these experiences. He wasn't just like, whereas someone like Noam Chomsky just kind of sits in his university. He doesn't really travel a whole lot, but he has this sort of like theoretical ideas that are very predictable. You can tell what he's going to say because it falls on a certain side of the ideological spectrum. But Christopher Hitchens, really, when he talked about things, you couldn't pinpoint it, you couldn't box him into a certain ideological category. You had it was truly, it was lived experience that he had, and he spoke about it. And his take on what I liked about his take on religion is that when he really talked about the succession of these Abrahamic religions. So he talked about the Old Testament as really the first book, and the Old Testament is just a flat out evil, horrendous book. This is something that Richard Dawkins wrote about too. I think his famous line about that all those descriptors of the God of the Old Testament, who's jealous and malicious, and I mean, so there's a quote about it. Um, that the very famous quote from Richard Dawkins talking about the God of the Old Testament. And then you have the New Testament that comes out that has this sort of this idea of, we have peace and love and forgiveness and turn the other cheek. But if you don't follow me, you're going to go and burn in torture for the rest of eternity, which really sort of cancels out the whole idea of love and peace in this short life on earth. So that in a way is also a form of terrorism, right? This whole idea that if you don't accept me, if you don't submit to me and accept who I am, then you are going to burn in torture for eternity. So what Islam did, and then this was a tough thing, Islam took all the sort of the earthly corporal punishments from the Old Testament, right, which are the stoning to death for adultery, a lot of these things that you see, the beheadings and the killing and against blasphemy, in Leviticus 24:16, it says the blasphemer should be put to death, and Islam doesn't. The Quran actually doesn't overtly say that, but it follows that pretty much in the Hadith, and it practically follows those things. So it borrowed a lot of these horrendous things from the Old Testament, right? Just really, really vile stuff, and then it took the idea of submission and afterlife and eternal torture and hellfire from the New Testament, from Christianity, and combined them to make a sort of a very sophisticated mass manipulation system. And all religions are mass manipulation systems. So it's Christopher Hitchens pointed this out really poignantly. He actually talked about the Quran being, he's like, and I have a quote in the book where like what I say in the book is the Quran and Islam is kind of as dangerous as it is boring. I mean, it's boring because it really borrowed heavily. There's very few things in Islam that are original. A lot of it is just plagiarized stuff from Judaism and Christianity, but it's dangerous because of the combinations of both of them that it's taken to really exert the worst kind of mass manipulation that you can possibly have. So that's one of my favorite things that Christopher Hitchens pointed out, and it was very even-handed. He didn't. I like the fact that he wasn't just an anti-Muslim. He was actually far from an anti-Muslim bigot. I think he had a problem with religion because he had sympathy for human beings. He had a lot of compassion for people who were Muslim and from the Muslim world. Christopher Hitchens was extremely he supported the Jewish state, obviously, with Israel, but he was extremely pro-Palestinian. He talked about how unfair it was what the Palestinians went through. So he was extremely even-handed in the way that he looked at all of these situations, and you couldn't box him in one category, and that's what I really respected about him.
Yeah, that's great. You talked about me, like, I left Hindu. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't follow Hinduism and I do reject it. A lot of people do confuse, most people confuse religion for people. I think there is an interchange of that. Look, I speak against, I would say I am rather dharmic phobic in a way. Dharmic is the word meaning the religious duty, okay?
Yeah.
Theological point of view. I'm against the theological point of view, but if Hindus are victims, wherever Hindus are victims of any oppression in any country like, say, Pakistan or Bangladesh, I stand with them. Or even within India, if lower caste person is victim, I stand with them, okay? But criticizing religion, mocking the deities, mocking the system, mocking that sort of belief, okay, is not equal to being hating the people. A lot of mistake happens here in terms of the understanding. And there is also same is the case with Islam as well. I mean, when someone leaves Islam, they expect him to like hate Muslim, but that's not the case necessarily. You can be critical of religion. I think that's most important. We are critical of the ideologies.
Yeah, this is actually this is one of the underlying themes of the book, which is what we're talking about today. Is that there's a difference between criticizing the religion and demonizing the religious people, and you're 100% right. I've been to places in Karachi. I remember going to places like these slums and shanty towns, like this place called Janesar Got, which has a huge Hindu community, and they're just living in just abject misery there. They're very, very badly mistreated. Christians are very badly mistreated, and in Pakistan, Ahmadi Muslims, who are thought they're murdered systemically in Pakistan. And so these are all groups that, even though I don't I don't believe in the Hindu religions. Obviously, I don't believe in any of their beliefs. But when you have these groups that are being targeted just for what they believe, that's a terrible, terrible thing. And we must stand with these people. It doesn't matter what our belief differences are. Same thing goes with in India. Right now, you've got this sort of wave of the Hindutva, I call them
Yeah.
the Hindutva jihadists, in a way that, these are people who are really, it's almost like they're competing with the Islamic jihadists to see, who's worse. And I don't even know why they're doing it, because India has such a rich and amazing history of secularism and pluralism that has made it and one of the emerging global powers today. That's the reason. So they're regressing into this tribalism because of this, just ridiculous jingoistic nationalism. And that there are minorities, that including lower caste Hindus, as you said, including many unfortunate Muslims who are also in poverty, that are being targeted. And do we have to stand with these people? You absolutely do. But on either side of the border, when you have these sort of majoritarian brutes, whether it's the Islamic people in Pakistan or the Hindutva people in India, and they're doing that to the minorities, we have to stand with the minorities irrespective of what their beliefs are.
Yeah, interesting point. But small clarification:
Mhm.
lower caste people are the more in number. They're not the minority.
Oh,
In
yes.
fact, yeah,
No, that's I
they're
said
more in number.
majoritarian.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but the
But
point is, those people who hereditarily inherited that privilege of upper caste, being upper caste,
mhm.
they constitute among Hindus only around 10 to 12% or 15%, not more than that.
Yeah.
I think that much. So they, when it comes to job sectors, government jobs, when it comes to you know talking about being in a higher positions, they occupy more number of those in that
Yeah, and
than
I
the
hope, I
yeah.
hope that helps. I hope there are, because these things inevitably, they don't. I am more optimistic about the world just because of the way that history has unfolded. Is that usually when you let these forces run loose because you think they're helping? I mean, in Pakistan, what happened? For years and years, Pakistan created the Taliban. The ISI, the intelligence service in Pakistan, created the Taliban. By building, those madrasas funded by Saudi money and, frankly, a lot of American money as well. And then these Taliban ultimately, when they became really big, they wanted to come for the Pakistani government. They wanted to take over. Then you had the Pakistani Taliban, and now they were attacking, the Sri Lankan team, the bus that the president of Pakistan had said that
Yeah,
I'm going to protect years
this was
ago.
I think back in 2008, I guess, if I'm not
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, and so they did that. They attacked the police compounds. They attacked the army school in 2014, and they killed the kids of all these army people. So now the Taliban are going against like these fundamental institutions in Pakistan that are supposed to protect the people. And it's the same. They essentially, they went and the Pakistan created this monster that ultimately came back to bite it in the ass. Like, in a way, the U.S. created the Mujahideen, who were fighting against the Soviets in the 80s, as part of the Cold War, praised them as equivalent to the founding fathers. Jihad was a good word because mujahideen literally means people who wage jihad. And these people were heroes to the Americans. And then ultimately, when they cut and ran and the next generation of the Taliban came, and then Al-Qaeda got to safe haven there, it came back, and then you have the attack of the World Trade Center. So whenever you leave on 9/11, whenever you let these forces go unchecked, ultimately they're going to come after you. And this will happen. Like, historically, it's always happened. It'll also happen in India. Once you give these people too much power, the first disagreement they have with the government is going to become a conflict. And that conflict will be much more bloody than anything that they have with non-Hindus. So this is just a natural course of how these movements rise. Every time you let a nationalistic, or especially a religious nationalistic movement just run out of hand, and you think it's helping you, these governments always think it's helping them. And when they do get out of hand, ultimately they come back and they try to challenge the government. They get too big, and it becomes an
Yeah.
issue. So I'm sort of optimistic that this is just a lot of this is a backlash. So the many extremists are kind of they're lamenting the world that they knew. They feel like the world is moving in a more progressive direction, and they want to hold on to what's familiar to them. So they're very loud and they're very boisterous. And people do scream the loudest in the throes of death. They're very loud, right? And but ultimately, it's not it's not a sign that things are turning worse. It is a symptom of a world that's turning for the better, because there is always a backlash movement. That backlash movements
Yeah,
can be extremely
true.
deadly, as we saw in World War II. There's only like about a decade or so, that you had the Hitler time and the Holocaust and all of that. But they can be extremely deadly, but they can feel very real. But in history, generally, they don't endure. They don't endure in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point, to be fair. And also, when you talked about India extremism, I would say that the extremist groups are like mainly, of course, there are the Islamic extremist group, I'm to correct, sorry, Islamic extremist group who believe in Wahhabism. There are a few of them. I,
Hmm.
I, I do know they do pose certain other types of threats, but when it comes to Hindus, I think there are groups like there are mostly militant groups. If
Right.
I'm not wrong, if I have to tell it correctly, I would say they're militant
Mm.
in that they carry out the weapons in the mob number, a mob of 300 to 400 people carrying out the weapons, having certain the trident, the sword, or the stones, or even the sometimes the guns and pistols in their hand, and surrounding minorities, and poking and doing the rioting work. So
Right.
I would say the groups like, mostly are like the Bajrang Dal, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, RSS, and you have the Hindu Sena. These are some of the groups. Of course there are many more of them. At least you add up another three or five of them. The mob, when I talk about the mob organizing them,
Mm.
these are the groups which do carry out kind of militant activities.
Yeah.
They're militant in the sense they carry out some weapons in their hand, and they terrorize the people during the riots. Okay, that's what I see.
Yeah.
And this is a problem, and I seriously hope that groups like Bajrang Dal, at least it's an extremist group, to be honest. Okay,
Hmm.
Bajrang Dal is banned. Bajrang Dal, Hindu Sena, who carry out militant activities. In fact, they make a image, an effigy of a Muslim man as a puppet, and they train the children of Bajrang Dal to look. See, he is the man you should shoot. He is a terrorist. Shoot
Hmm.
him with
Yeah.
pistols. So these things need to be banned. These things need to go. This is
Yeah.
not a progressive worldview. So
It's not. I mean,
that's the
yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
that we don't want a world where we live like how it was in 1940s or 1930s Germany. We don't want that sort of world where Nazis are having a military parades
Hmm.
and terrorizing the people. We don't want that sort of country. We want secular, democratic, liberal country which is more progressive, which looks at the problems of 21st century and develops more innovatively. That's
That's
the point of view.
very well
That's what
said,
I look at.
Rakshit. That's
Yeah,
exactly how I look at it too. And it's with India, and I call myself Indian Pakistani. My parents were born in India, and I was born in Pakistan. That makes me Indian Pakistani. And we have relatives in India, I have relatives in Pakistan, and ultimately people are people. And what I just India just has this really really rich history of being the largest democracy
pluralistic.
in the world, the largest yet pluralistic democracy. And what's really amazing about the Muslim population, India has, I think, the second largest, or sometimes the third largest Muslim population in the world. And it has been, India is it's a place where you had the largest sort of non-violent transformative revolution in history. It gave that example. I mean, they made an example of this, nonviolence and everybody being able to get along. There's a tremendous history of so many good things. You had the people who were skeptics. Jawaharlal Nehru was an atheist.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was agnostic. Yeah,
And
agnostic.
agnostic, yeah, but and
Yeah,
the whole point is, like, he believed in this whole idea of pluralism and everybody getting along, and there was a good reason for it. I mean, India just economically, I mean, in every way you look at it, just made a tremendous amount of progress, and is an emerging global power right now, and it's threatening to, because of all of this, ridiculous sort of tribal Game of Thrones style nationalism. It's threatening to go back. I don't know why they're they're just, it's almost like they're looking at Pakistan next door and thinking, okay, yeah, we want to do that as well. Why would you want to do that? It's
I
just an
mean,
absolute national suicide.
yeah, that's actually stupidity, in my opinion. But
Mm,
to be honest, actually, why I do say Bajrang Dal or Vishwa Hindu Parishad or Hindu Sena should be banned, the reason is not just that. The reason is about misogyny. You know,
yes.
they do this moral policing. I seriously hate moral policing
Yeah.
in public.
Yeah.
They do this moral policing, and there are plenty of videos where they catch hold of couples, they catch hold of random person, and why are you wearing this shirt? Oh, this represents colonial way of living. This represents colonial way of talking.
Just like the
Moral,
mullahs in Pakistan, they do the exact
the, the,
same thing.
the the moral
Yeah.
policing is, I think, shows a kind of mental illness, folks. I mean, we are not living in a world of theocratic society. This is not a theocratic society world current, right?
Yeah.
We have progressed, we have come out of religion in the last 500 years, and we are looking ahead, far ahead, right?
Hmm.
So folks,
Yeah.
you have to come out of these ideas, right?
Mm.
People coming randomly and catching all, doing moral policing. And there is also new things among especially the right wing. I'm talking about a specific group here, not all Hindus, to be honest. A
Hmm.
specific group, they do this Twitter trend. I mean, anything offensive, whether it's advertisement, whether it's movie, whether it's actor, whether it's anything which offends or which they feel is offensive. Of course, I am not offended. I think people are open to expressing the way they want. They go
Yeah.
berserk. They run this, boycott that trend in Twitter. I mean, that's, folks, we are not living in 1910s when we had a boycott
It's
movement
like
in
the
India
cartoons.
against British. We are not
What
living in
the
that time, God's sake.
Yeah, it's like what the Muslim world does when they react to cartoons. So and you're right. I mean, this is a this the taking offense and having just this is also something that's obviously they're anti-freedom, right? They don't want people to be free and people to be expressing
Yeah,
themselves. That freedom of expression is just this fundamental value that anybody who's grown up the way that, I mean, many of us have. Like, I grew up in Saudi Arabia, where it was it's something that we never take for granted. People who grew up like this, we never take for granted. So when we see anybody trying to clamp down on freedom of expression, even if it's especially actually if it's um, against ideas that we don't like and trying to ban them, this is something that leaves a very, very bad taste in the mouth, right? And this is a problem that we have in both India and Pakistan. But I just hope that I have to commend your group, what you're doing, because nowadays it's really, really hard to find skeptics and rationalists who are not swayed by their own nationalistic and their own tribal politics, right? I do meet,
yeah.
unfortunately, yeah. So
That's true.
it's a very difficult thing to find. It's becoming rarer and rarer. So I think that
Yeah,
your group and the voices that you have, the rational thinkers, ex-Hindu
yeah,
atheists, everything that you guys do is it just needs to be more prominent. And I think that is that when people like us from different parts of the world, from different religious backgrounds, come together on and we don't just talk about what we're against, which is religious theology, but what we're for. We're for an evidence-based, reality-based approach to life, where we can all connect and we can all get along and leave our tribal, birth identities behind. That is the key to, I think, progress, and whether it's India or Pakistan, whether it's a Muslim world or the
yeah.
Hindu world, that's the
True.
way to go about it.
And when you do talk about evidence-based reality, I think this kind of resonates very well with a philosophy called logical positivism. And I
Mm.
think you might have heard of Vienna Circle. I think there was Kurt Gödel,
Yeah.
Moritz Schilk. They were people who mocked metaphysics. Metaphysics was something which they mocked, actually, the
Mhm.
Vienna Circle. And you know, today when you think about people like coming out and talking about pseudoscience, and people don't dare mock, then I think it's time to remind them of the Vienna Circle, which did
Yeah.
that precisely during the 1930s.
They did it, and it's a big problem. Like one of the times, like whenever whenever I have these discussions with a lot of these sort of religious people, I remember we were talking to Daniel Hakikaju, who's like this sort of fundamentalist Islamic guy, and they always talk about, they come up and they're like, well, we have to look at the metaphysical, this metaphysical. Like, if you talk to people about metaphysics, most of them, they don't even know what it is. Like, they can't define it. It takes like 2 paragraphs of explanations before they actually get down to explaining what this stuff is. It's like a catch-all phrase to excuse pretty much everything. And this is well, that's a whole other podcast episode on philosophy versus science and the scientific method. But we can talk about this some other time.
And we have Gulzar. Hello, Gulzar. You have any questions?
Hi, Gulzar.
Yes. Ali bhai, we have 2 similarities. I don't know if you know about me, but usually I'm busy with my channel and also trying to, change people's mind. And now 2 things in common: your chair, your, gaming chair. It's helped me out for my neck and back thing. So,
oh yeah, me too.
Second thing, Karachi. I'm from Karachi, and I have all memories. Like, I got nostalgic when I see you. Whenever I take your, when I watch your interviews, I know Karimabad, Aga Khani thing. You have people, Jamaat Khana. So I read your book also, Ex-Muslim Atheist. That was, I think I named correctly, right? That was your book.
Yeah, it was the Atheist Muslim. Yeah.
Yes, and second thing, I also give you congratulations how you handled apostate imam. That was awesome, and the way you were handling, awesome. And you are very bilingual in your language plus English, so that makes very good activists just like you. Plus, I will have few questions about it. I know Hindutva is really trying to disarm our movement because they are fake ex-Muslims, and they try to blackmail Indian ex-Muslim by looking their face. And then, I have a lot of stories. It will take a lot of time, but I think you are aware about this thing, so I don't have to get into it. My question is, these days, Twitter space is new phenomena. A lot of famous people come on Twitter space and they share their thoughts. So in the morning, I was in Twitter space, and the topic was going on that why Pakistani mard become change or aape se bahar ho jate in Western countries. And they were just doing, or even professors was there, Ali professor, but they were talking like very street talk, or because they don't follow Islam. The problem is Islam, because one side Islam says that men and women don't have to look at each other, and then you separate them as well, so you increase frustration. And then, so my question is, educated people is a challenge for Islam. They take Islam as very positive and liberal thing, even they are living in Western countries. So my 2 quick questions: how do you see new Twitter space phenomena? Second question, how to deal with educated Western Muslims when they don't know Islam and they always brag about Islam? So
yeah, I'm gonna, so the first one, the Twitter space, what you're saying is, I mean, it's not just when it comes to this topic. The problem is that when everybody has a voice and everybody's speaking anonymously, and people just much more brutal and mean to each other when they're hiding behind their laptops and they don't have to face each other in person. So Twitter, fortunately, I don't think is representative of much of the real world, and people are realizing this, and we saw this in the U.S. election. Kind of things that you were seeing on Twitter just really turned out to be the exact opposite of how they turned out in reality. So I think that that's one thing about Twitter. I think that there's people haven't really figured out how to regulate social media in a way. I think that they're beginning to. It's not perfect. There's still issues, but they're starting to regulate it to some extent, just like they did with the TV networks. TV networks had certain things. There's certain times of the day when they can't show certain things. There's other times of the day when they can. So it just really, I think that'll happen eventually with these internet forums as well. But the second question You asked, can you repeat the second part of it again?
Yeah, second question. I was referring to the same space that when educated liberal
Yeah,
people living in West, they don't know Islam and they brag about Islam. How to handle those people?
you just speak about it. You have to just talk about it the way that, like, everybody has a space, so they speak about things in their own way. One of the things that is the most sinister about religious belief and religious ideology is the extent to which it gets its tentacles into our sense of identity. Right? So people are indoctrinated into this when they're younger, when they're children. At the same age that they believe in Santa Claus and Tooth Fairy, you also tell them about God and the prophets and whatever other myths you have in your particular religion. So they're very susceptible to it. Nobody would fall for this stuff if they're taught about it for the first time but because they are taught as kids, they fall for it. So it becomes part of their identity. So when you challenge their religious beliefs, they actually take it as a personal attack on who they are. Okay, and this is one of the things that we have to counter if we are going to counter, some of these sort of educated people who really don't know anything about the religion. What they're defending is their identity. They're saying, I was born in a Muslim family. My parents are Muslim. My grandparents, my ancestors were all Muslim, or Hindu, or whatever they are. And when you attack the belief system, you're attacking me, and you're attacking my family and my friends and my ancestors and everything. So they look at their religion as a birth identity, sort of like people would look at their race or their nationality. And they look at it, when you target them, they feel that you're targeting one of these things. It's very similar to them, as if, that's why a lot of them, people say that if you say negative things about Islam or their Muslim faith or their Hindu faith or whatever, they're saying that, you are being racist, and you're not really being racist, because nobody's born with a hijab on their head. Nobody's born, pre-circumcised. And these are, you can convert out of these religions. So it's not actually a racism thing, but that's how deeply the identity and the ideology are interlinked with each other. So once we have that insight and we understand what's happening, then you have to basically find ways in which you can separate the two. In my case, I find that when I speak to some of these liberal Muslims, I can bond with them and I can establish a rapport with them based on our identity. Like, I grew up the same way as you did. Yes, I used to grow up praying, and I remember how hungry I used to feel right before iftar. And, we have all of these memories and shared experiences that we can bond over. And once you establish that identity link, then you can go ahead and talk about, okay, well, here are the ideas that I'm skeptical about. And at that point, they're disarmed, and they feel more comfortable, and they will often come out and say, yes, I'm uncomfortable, I've been confused about these ideas as well. And they're more forthcoming with those things. So that's sort of one way to handle it and to talk about it, is just really make this distinction between ideology and identity clear, right, with them. And the other thing is just to speak about your opinion. Let people know that there is an option. Many people who are raised and this includes me too, raised in from a Muslim background, they think that your choices, what you can be is, you could be a conservative Muslim, moderate Muslim, liberal Muslim. Those are your three choices. So often, they will meet you and they'll think, oh, so you can be you can reject the religion altogether and still be a decent person and still get along and still be friendly and be a completely normal. You don't have devil horns on your head or anything like that. You're completely normal. So when they see that, they realize that is also an option. It doesn't just have to be in the fold of the faith. So it's a slower process. It takes a little bit of time, but that is, I think, how you do it. You just continue the conversation, and you remember that everybody has a right to express themselves. Yeah.
Also, I have one question from the book. You have talked about, of course, you have talked about the World Trade Center and 9/11, but you do mention about the Arab Spring 2011, and you talked about the world just kept silent when the ISIS took over Iraq, Syria in 2014. So would you say the world was just not prepared for it, or was it something any pre-planned, or they just allowed it to happen and they couldn't, gauge the ideology of Wahhabism? at the
Yeah, I
time,
yeah,
2014.
look,
This was, yeah.
anything that happens in that region of the world is very confusing. It's very confusing. It's very complex. So you have to think about whether you're going to get into it or not. Like ISIS was a really interesting phenomenon because it came up as rising against, and it came around, not much long after the Arab Spring, when there were all these like rise ups against these dictators. Many of them were sort of quasi secular, like Mubarak and like Ben Ali in Tunisia and everything. So these people, they were brought down from power. Now ISIS came up against as a initially you had a legitimate uprising, an Arab Spring type uprising against Assad in Syria, and then you had ISIS that came up that way and they became the Islamic State, and they wanted to reestablish the caliphate in Syria and the Levant, right? So now when this happens, Iran is obviously very opposed to ISIS because ISIS is Wahhabi Sunni fundamentalists, and they don't really like Shias at all, and Iran is majority Shia, so Iran doesn't like them. But Iran and ISIS is fighting against Assad, so Iran and Assad are aligned. But then the United States doesn't like ISIS either. So now the United States and Iran are on the same side against ISIS. And it's, I mean, they're these alliances and the kind of things that happened basically in the Middle East are very, very, very confusing because people, depending on the issue, you have these alliances of people who'd be enemies otherwise, like the Arab Sunni states and Israel fighting against Iran. It's very, very convoluted. So a lot of times when the U.S. gets involved in these situations, right, they don't really it backfires, and we saw that with Afghanistan. They didn't fully understand it. You saw that with Iraq. They didn't really understand the dynamics between the Shia and the Sunni and the sectarian warfare, and how Saddam Hussein, as evil as he was kind of keeping that somehow under control. And it's a good thing that he's gone, but they weren't prepared. The United States wasn't prepared for what would happen afterwards. They don't fully grasp what these situations are like. With Syria, they wanted to intervene when there was a chemical weapons attack. Obama's favorite red line was like, we want to intervene. We're going to go in if they do anything, chemical weapons attack. But when it happened, they realized that, we're screwed if we go in. We're screwed if we don't. So do we really want to do this? Do we want to put American lives on the line and get involved? And now they're at the point, I think, with the Biden administration where they're just disengaging. They're just getting out of all of this stuff because it's way too complicated for them. And it's too convoluted. No matter what side you take, eventually it backfires on you. So when the emergence of ISIS happened, it was the same thing. You just don't know what side you want to be on. You don't know which side you want to work with. Are you going to work with mortal enemies who are suddenly on the same side as you? Or are you going to make alliances or are you going to go against, former friends who are completely, on the other side of the issue as you are? So oftentimes I think the wise realization is now dawning on many Western states that disengagement and being involved as little as possible is probably the best course of action.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and we know the kind of situation Afghanistan is facing, and I think it's a very, very serious situation currently, I guess. So,
Yeah.
what really is the future ahead for Afghanistan and the growing ex-Muslim movement in Iran? So, just can you brief on that and what's the future ahead? Yeah.
Oh, in the future in Iran, Iran's really interesting because I think it's just a function of time and how things will happen. I mean, there's recently a survey of around 40,000 people, and we covered this with Armin Navabi on Secular Jihadists. There's a survey where we actually found out that a little less than 50% of people in Iran say that they don't align with Islam anymore. They're just sort of, many of them, they still believe in God, but they don't necessarily align with Islam. So in an interesting sort of turn of events, Iran, if you go with the survey, which is actually quite a reliable survey of tens of thousands of people living in Iran, Iran is kind of a Muslim minority country now. And you wouldn't be able to tell because of clerical leadership. And chances are it probably became that way because of the clerical leadership. I mean, what happened in Iran with all these, this Islamic revolution and this religious theocracy taking power is something that, it happened several decades ago. Whereas, with Egypt, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood, when they first got elected, that was very recent. So they're kind of ahead, and it's a good sign of it's an interesting sign of things to come. So with Iran, there are cracks right now in the clerical leadership. It's aging, it's older. There are challenges that the government is facing in terms of the people becoming more liberal, the people becoming more secular. Just rising protests every couple of years. You have these protests and people willing to go out in the streets and die just to get their their freedom and their say. And and these things are not just happening now in Tehran. They're happening all over the place. So it's a very it's a sort of a wait and watch approach, but I just don't think it's something that they can hold on to forever, especially now that you have they're facing other issues. Like Iran still has a sort of Game of Thrones style attitude towards conflict. Is they have Hezbollah, the borders of Israel. They have these proxies everywhere fighting like old school style. Whereas what the Sunni Arab countries are doing is all the economic powerhouses are kind of joining forces. So you have the UAE, you have Qatar, you have Saudi Arabia that's opened up its airspace to Israel, and they're forming alliances with Israel now. And these are all economic, world. Just there's no competition, and there's no competition that they go against Iran, and that really is a currency of warfare or conflict now in this day and age. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens next, but it will be something completely different than what we've seen in the past. And I don't think anybody. And I think anybody who says they know what's going to happen now just doesn't know. I don't think you can trust that from anyone.
And regarding Afghanistan as well, yeah, I mean, I know the situation is not very good, but how do you look at it from futurist point of view? And is there any chance of improvement, or what's ahead for them?
With Afghanistan, the Taliban at one point, I mean, this was a renegade movement. You are already seeing, I am not hopeful about the Taliban. So I want to preface this by that. Like, I don't see any really good thing happening there. But there are sort of certain things that you're seeing in the world. It's very, very slow and it's hard to tell. Saudi Arabia is a good example. So when I grew up, they had no movie theaters. You couldn't have, they didn't have any music. They didn't have, women couldn't drive. And now, with MBS, who is by all accounts a horrible human being, and everything he's doing is terrible there too. And they've got the war against Yemen. That's a whole different issue. But they have to open up. They have to now open up the country because the world is not as dependent on their oil as it used to be. So that one trick pony thing that they had, with the oil, is just not as big a deal anymore. So now he wants to open up the country so you can attract foreign investors. You can give them some security that, yes, if you invest in Saudi Arabia, we've got this vision 2030 and we are going to modernize. We're going to open up. Now, Taliban is not at that point, or even remotely, but it's really interesting that ISIS Khorasan, right, their main rival, think that the Taliban is not religious enough. So now they're coming up with these ideas where they're not like the Taliban of 20 years ago. They're not exactly the same way. There are many things that they're doing that are differently. I don't really trust it. I don't know how enduring it'll be. But ultimately, now that before they were rebels, now they're statesmen, and they're going to need an economy. They're going to need a functioning economy. They're going to need survival for the country, and they're going to have to figure out how they're going to do it. And what shape that takes, I don't know. I am not as optimistic about Afghanistan as I am about some of the other things that we talked about. But yeah, it's a wild card. I don't know which direction it'll go in.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting point. Surely I would like to have a next live with you as another 2-3 live maybe future, where we'll more discuss about the ex-Muslims worldwide and the ex-Muslim movements within India and your other experiences. I did see your interview with Apostate Imam. It was very interesting, actually.
That was fun.
And
That
I,
was fun.
in fact, did post it in my community post in Rational Thinker, and I did tag your channel and Atheist Republic. That it's okay to be Islamophobic, but it's not okay to be Muslim phobic. We need to understand difference between Islamophobic and Muslim phobic. We are for Islamophobic, but not for
I don't
Muslim
know
phobic.
what was going on with him, because obviously, this is you see this many, like he I don't know who he is. I mean, he's anonymous and he changes his voice when he comes on. So, I'm not going to say that he's not an ex-Muslim that he claims, but he says he claims that he's an ex-Muslim activist, and he certainly knows a lot about Islamic history. He seems like he's really gone into the Islamic scriptures, which you also see. It's not unusual. So we talked about that. We aligned on it, and I think in the second and a half hour we started talking about human rights and the Hindutva, the hypocrisy of the Hindutva people. And he was just very, very defensive about the Hindutva. He was saying that the same things that he opposed in Islam, he was supporting if the Hindutva did them. And that was pretty stunning to us. So we didn't let that point go. And we kept on hammering him on it. And ultimately, he lost power in his house and his laptop also died. So, yeah. And he had to leave the podcast. So it was kind of interesting how that happened. But I'm very happy. I'd be very happy to bring him on and talk about it further.
Yeah. Okay, so I will let you go. Can I ask you a question, Sharastra? Because you are the host in this stream. I don't want to hijack your stream. Yes, Rakshit.
Yeah, you can ask one last question.
Yeah.
And one more thing I would like to make it clear. Wait, Sarashtra. I would like to make one thing clear regarding the ex-Muslim movement. I think it varies region to region, and we will have a separate live stream on it with Ali Rizvi and him. Also, maybe we can have Haris Sultan as well for live on that particular topic. But apart from that, today's, I think, Gulzar, this will be the last question which Gulzar will be asking, and I have to wrap it up.
Yeah, I will make one question with A, B, C part, so don't worry about it. I'm very clever.
Sure.
I know.
Okay.
So,
one question.
Because this is my first interaction with you. So I always like to listen to you, Armin. You all guys are rational. And what happens in, Hindutva thing that when we leave Islam, they think we can accept other religions. They don't know that leaving Islam is a small tip of the iceberg. Being rational is everything. Then we can deny, Jesus Christ. We can deny, Hanuman, whatever. So first of all, because you have a medical background, it's my wish, my dream that you could have one stream with Ghalib Kamal on evolution, because you also can put your medical thoughts over there. Ghalib Kamal is genius on evolution. That's my first thing. So I hope Rakshit will help out to engage you with Ghalib Kamal for the stream together. That's my first.
Oh, yeah. Please connect us. I've heard of him. Yes.
Yes, and Ghalib Kamal is going to have almost 50,000 subscribers. He's genius. I think we respect him because he has classical combination of history, evolution, as an ex-Christian background. So this is very important that you guys can engage. Second thing, now I'll have very quick questions. It won't be long. Did you ever get a chance to visit Karachi after you wrote a book? Because it's risky city or risky country.
No, I haven't, and it's precisely because of that, and it's very unfortunate that I wasn't able to. That after I wrote the book, unfortunately, even though it's in English, it's a little bit more prominent now, especially in Pakistan, than I thought it would be. So I have just based on some of the communications I've gotten from Karachi and some of the threats that I've gotten from Pakistan. Right now, it's not. I wouldn't take the risk of going there. And I also, one of my friends, Avijit Roy, was was murdered when he went to Dhaka back in 2015, and he was also, So I mean, there are many experiences like that I've seen that have happened. So I would
my impression is Avijit Roy, Bangladesh. Okay. My impression only for Dr. Avijit Roy. I am activity 2014. The 2015 is a very dangerous movement. Is the Avijit Roy killing, Washikur Rahman killing, as every Bangladeshi blogger killing. It's a very dangerous movement.
Yeah.
And another thing, the way Haris and Ghalib take live calls, do you have any plan in the future? Like you can be very instrumental in spreading awareness in Pakistan side, Indian side. So do you have any plan for the future that you would start some kind of live calls format? Last thing. And also, before I leave, I would also, with the Rakshit help and Sharastra, I would invite you to my channel also.
Yeah, sure.
Zarili official TV channel. And whenever you have a time, no problem, no rush. But I would love to take your interview also on my channel. And last thing again, I wish you best of luck to you. You all are rational people, and keep up good work.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking me. And don't miss my last question. Like, how is your future plan for taking live calls and changing people's mind? The way you handle is awesome. So thank you so much, Ali. Thank you, Surastra, and thank you, Rakshit.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Gulzar.
Gulzar, coming
Yeah,
for coming here.
yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Gulzar
No,
is the
thank
next
you for
live.
that.
There
And
is a question. Gulzar, no problem. Next day, Tariq, okay, that fix next live as question Ali Rizvi and 10 people only for 10 minutes, 10 people
Oh,
next
okay.
day.
The way you said fixed date, I thought you were talking about my marriage fixed date.
Rakshit, talking about Ali Bhai. Okay.
I that's a great idea. I think I might. That's a I've been thinking about it about whether to take live questions. I mean, we do take questions from the live chat on secular jihadists, but I guess you mean in Hindi or Urdu. So
Okay.
I might do that. I'll reach out to Harris, and I definitely want to talk to Ghalib Kamal. I've heard about him a lot, so I'll see if we can do something together, and then maybe if get some idea on how to do something like that on my own from time to time, and maybe you have a live call system. So let's see. That's a good idea. Thank you,
Yeah.
Gulzar. It's great to talk to you guys as well, and I love the work that you're doing, and I fully support it. It's very, very different from what we see from India right now, and I feel this special kinship with you guys because I think we're all on the same page when it comes to the basics and the fundamentals.
Yeah, and of course, I know there are not many things in that books, and of course, we couldn't. It's not possible to cover it in live sessions of YouTube. The entire thing. I've just taken out the key things which I think is required for the public based on the book, like
Yeah.
about your journey, a little bit about your early life, your skepticism, and then what Maryam Nawazi and ex-Muslim movement. Little bit about the Shia Islam which you talked about, and also about the unknown thing which is about Thomas Jefferson, which I talked initially, and then
Yeah.
about the tweets and the ex-Muslim movement which is going ahead. I think those are some of the key points, and also I think towards the end I did emphasize you have quoted extensively from Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. I think those are, I think, the key areas which I thought was appropriate and hence I took. But of course, there are plenty of things which you have talked about. I guess there is a lot to read in that book. And again, viewers, go to Amazon or Kindle and just check out for the book, A Journey of Atheist Muslim Journey Towards Reason from Religion. It's an excellent, gift you can have. So do check it out, and do have an online copy or a hard copy of it. So please feel free to check it out. Yeah.
Thank you, Rakshit. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll be wrapping it up. And thanks for the viewers who have been viewing this and having all the comments and posting kindly here. Thanks.